nothing's worse than when a band stops taking chances and puts out the same record over and over again. But I get it, it's scary to get out of your comfort zone. By 1990, Metallica was faced with that crossroad. They had built a solid following over the course of 4 albums, but their apocalyptic lyrics, layered over sophisticated thrash metal, had become predictable. But in an era when it was felt that it had all been seen and heard before, there was one corner Metallica had never ventured into. They realized they could make one record they had sworn as kids they would fight to the death never to make, yet the one their musical lives might depend on. That is something so blatantly commercial, no one could have seen it coming. Or as drummer Lars Ulrich put it, cram Metallica down everybody's fucking throats all over the fucking world.
Yeah, yeah!
As their live shows to wrap up their And Justice for All tour winded to a close in the summer of 1990, Metallica began to turn their sights on what their next record might look like. One thing was clear, all 4 members agreed they didn't want to make an And Justice for All Part 2. Their 1988 album was critically acclaimed and was their best seller to date. However, the long, intricate, almost prog metal, convoluted songs failed to translate well into their live shows. Plus, artistically, they had felt they'd taken their progressive thrash concept as far as they could.
We had finished the Justice tour about 9 months before, and we really felt that there was something specific that we wanted to do, which was to sit down and try and write simple songs. Simple songs compared to what? I mean, simple songs compared to where we'd been before.
As the band now discussed their next album, they knew Metallica's place as thrash metal's biggest band was unassailable. Now they would set their sights on an even greater prize, becoming the world's biggest rock band, period. In August of 1990, frontman James Hetfield met up with Lars to go through their usual pre-production demo process before recording an album. They would sort through hours of a cassette they simply called the riff tape. It was a collection of rough guitar riffs and melodies they all had collected over the years, whatever wasn't used in previous albums, and whatever new ideas came into the fold.
All the songs from day one were usually based around a riff. You get a good riff, that's pretty much the meat of the song, and you're kind of adding things on to it as you go along.
It just so happened to be one of lead guitarist Kirk Hammett's riffs that caught their attention early on. It came from one of Kirk's typical 3 o'clock in the morning jams with just him and his guitar. Out came this simple riff pattern with a great groove, inspired by the heavy riffs on Soundgarden's 1989 album, Louder Than Love.
And when it came time to start getting songs together, Lars called me up and said, "Hey, this is a great riff, on your tape." I go, what are you talking about? And he played it to me over the phone. I go, "Oh yeah, I remember that." And that was only like the second or third time I'd ever listened to it.
But Lars envisioned something slightly different than the original riff. Initially, upon each pass of the riff, Kirk followed it with a tail.
I came up with the idea of changing it around so it would become, 3 and then the tail.
The riff would lay the foundation for the biggest hit of their career up to then, Enter Sandman. For the lyrics, James usually follows a similar approach as to how they comb through their riffs to start a song. Metallica had a running song titles list, and there was one phrase that kept getting bumped.
Enter Sandman, I think, has been around the longest. Everyone's going, what the hell does that mean?
James thought it would be a good idea to try combine Kirk's riff to this song title that had been kicked aside. Maybe Enter Sandman could be about a baby dying in a crib. So James put pen to pad on a story about a baby lying there, and the Sandman comes in at night and kills it. But for Metallica's new fresh-faced producer, it was too much. Bob Rock was a former small-time Canadian musician who'd since hit it big as a producer for Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood. As part of Metallica's new musical direction, they thought Bob's ear for a commercial sound fit perfectly into the new territory they wanted to be in. However, Rock was a perfectionist and wasn't afraid to speak his mind. He told James his lyrics about a baby dying were just too gruesome to be accessible, plus it didn't have any real meaning to James. The part where he sings the Off to Never Neverland lyric was originally Disrupt the Perfect Family. At the time, Metallica had this rule though, nobody could comment on anybody else's stuff. Nobody had ever talked to James about his lyrics before, and so it was quite uncomfortable. James would eventually swallow his annoyance, though, and came back to the studio weeks later with rewritten lyrics. James reframed it as a kind of twisted lullaby that drew on a child's fears, real and imagined. James later said, quote, "I wanted more of the mental thing where this kid gets manipulated by what adults say. And you know when you wake up with that shit in your eye? That's supposedly been put in there by the Sandman to make you dream. So the guy in the song tells this little kid that, and he kind of freaks. He can't sleep after that, and it works the opposite way."
Sleep with one eye open, gripping your pillow tight. Exit light, and tonight, take my hand, off to Never Neverland.
Never Never Land, of course, the fictional home to Peter Pan, which represents childhood innocence. But the way James sings, it sounds more like a sinister place. In the bridge, they do a spin on the old Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep lullaby, and also on a classic children's song.
Hush, little baby, don't say a word, and never mind that noise you heard. It's just the beast under your bed, in your closet, in your head.
Although Enter Sandman was the first demo laid down in August of 1990, more than 7 months would pass before James hammered out the lyrics and vocals. According to Lars, Enter Sandman would be the foundation to guide the whole Black Album. Released as a single on July 29th, 1991, it became Metallica's biggest song thus far, teeing up the next stage of their career. Enter Sandman, overexposed as it might be, is commercial heavy metal at its finest. Metallica ventured into that unknown corner of making a commercial song they swore as kids they'd never make. But by getting out of their comfort zone and still staying true to themselves, the world would welcome it, being crowned down its throat.
To Never Neverland.